Today we're going to be breaking down this scene in the school where they're in the science lab and it all gets a little bit sexy. I've been very good about keeping all of the sexy stuff out of this actually. I didn't even do the very first scene of the whole series, which had quite a lot of nudity in, so I'm keeping it pretty PG so far. We'll see how we get towards the end of the series. So what do we have to call out just here? First thing, it is a very square frame. Before, when we looked at that shot which was on a Dutch angle, and I talked about the idea that in architectural photography, you try to, for the most part, get your lines perpendicular, and you take a lot of care to, especially on wide angle lenses, position your camera in a place where you're going to be able to get really clean, precise lines. Here, they've done just that. Everything is square, to the point that we're actually very high up in the space. We're high up, we're looking flat on, and we've got, I would wager, let's try measuring this out a little bit actually. So from there to there, and where's the back of the room? There to there. Yeah, sort of like that. We've got almost an equal amount of floor and ceiling in shot, and that tells you a lot. It tells you that you're kind of equidistant to the floor and the ceiling with your camera. Obvious stuff, but unless you think about it, you don't necessarily realize it. A couple of other things. We have lots of nice leading lines to call out, which will point us towards Otis, because as well as being roughly in the center of the room vertically, we are in the center of the room horizontally as well. So all of this stuff, all of these lines are pointing back towards him. We've even got the line of lights there, and even over this side a bit as well. All focusing in, and then he is framed up against this board in the background. I do wonder about that board actually, because a lot of the time now in schools they have whiteboards, they don't have chalkboards. So I reckon that maybe they dress that in as a bit of set dressing. Again, I'd love to talk to someone. I'd love to do like a podcast interview with someone who is on these sets and just run through some stuff, because there's so many questions I have about even just the production design, let alone the lighting and all the other setups. That's the major thing then to call out for this frame, the kind of single point perspective, just all focused in on Otis as he walks in. We have another little frame off to the side with the science teacher. He's catching the light, you can see it all down his side just there, and that's same as everyone else. It's a little bit more down in there, and it's got this blue paint, so he stands out, which is cool. Apart from that, call the windows, they are really bright. I mean, like, on the edge of being uncomfortably exposed, just holding it, but it's just on the edge just there. And because they're also on the edge of the lens, we're getting all of that stuff that we've called out a couple of times. You've got the sort of bluey cyan down that side, and then the reddy look down this side of the pillar. And you can see that on everything else as well. You can see it on this girl's hair just here, and even on her face and on his hat a little bit. It's the character of the lenses that they're using coming through, and that all adds to the pattern of tones that we're getting in this scene. Also, in the back, we've got this TV screen. Now, a TV like that will reflect anything in the room, and you can see it's reflecting Otis, but they've obviously taken quite a lot of care not to show the crew and the camera in that TV screen. It's something that's worth remembering, because when you're doing this kind of thing, picture frames, windows, TV screens, computer screens, anything like that that's reflective in the background can completely ruin a shot, because you end up with your lighting fixtures in it or your crew in it. So being aware of that kind of stuff really helps. Move on to the next frame. Walks over to Maeve. We've got an enormous amount of light coming in, and you can really see, I'm going to do it in red, the rest of the school building is out there, but it is super hot. But then what we've got on them is actually a reasonable amount of level, and she's pretty flat as well. And there's just flat light over her. Obviously the edge of her hair is catching a little bit more. Otis is a little bit more down just here, but there's not too much to call from that. Direction of the light seems to be this way, because we can see, in fact, let's do that in red. We can see the shadow of the pillar just here, and that's playing across the table, and you can see the shadows there and down here and down here. All of that, even he's casting a shadow. means that the light is coming from that direction somewhat, but it's just a general ambient from the sky. So it's not like it's not coming from this side as well, it's just that seems to be the direction that's catching the most. Next, things start to fall down. The difference, I think, between these two shots is pretty stark, and everything takes on a slightly different tone. So in Maeve's hair, we've got a little bit more yellowy, greeny going on compared to the previous shot, where we had more yellowy gold kind of look. It's a slightly different angle, but still it's changed quite a bit. And also, she's not catching nearly as much light, so it feels like maybe they had a bounce just here, and maybe they don't have the bounce so much just there, or maybe it's around here a bit. Additionally, she's getting quite a shiny edge along there. Moving on. Changing again, so that shot to that shot. Vast, vast difference in how the light's playing out and how everything actually sits. So in this shot, we can see a couple of cool things. One, they appear to have shut some of the lights that are in the ceiling off to get these shots. We've still got these ones above Otis's head on, but on this side, it feels like they've turned things off. And that works because this whole area feels kind of down and a little bit green and, dare I say, a little bit dingy in the back there. We have a little bit less happening in the windows. You can see more of what's outside. It's not so blown out. And we've definitely got shaping going on. So they've got light catching all down the sides and Maeve's catching tons down here. Got some cool reflections happening in the desks. And we're very low. So looking at where we're positioned, obviously you've got all of the plugs and whatnot in the foreground. And that pretty much means that the camera is sitting at desk height looking up at them. And when you do this, obviously you're going to catch more ceiling. And it's interesting how they keep switching the angles and the height of the camera to make people feel different things as we move through. Moving to a really close shot of Maeve, and you can see in her eye actually, feels like just here, that's the window. You can sort of see the shape, it's kind of like going like this. Sort of shape with this half being really bright and this half a little bit down. And it's not entirely flattering on her skin, it does feel like a little bit shinier, a little bit more specular going on, a little bit more reflecty in her face just there. Otis is just a big blob of flat light just there as well. We've got a lot of pink in her hair and the background has just gone super duper green. Everything there is way off to green and yellow. Moving across to here, we do have a discrepancy in my opinion between the skin tones. So here it's all yellowy orange, I feel. And here it definitely moves to a pinkier tone. So looking at Maeve's arm, I know her arm wasn't actually in the previous shot, and when people are made up, their faces can be a different colour from the arm because of makeup, but her arm is definitely pink, Otis is definitely pink, and even her face is more towards pink than it was in the previous shot. If you look at her forehead, just there, definitely going that way. We do have one light just above her, which is on, and then in the background we've got these yellow cabinets. Everything is off to that kind of yellowy green tone still in the back, and all of that is shut off, so none of those lighting fixtures up there are on. Now we move to this next shot. I feel like this is where the room starts to take on two different characters for me, where we have the shots looking into the space, where we see all the green in the background and we're getting flat light on them. Here they are edge lit by the window, even though it's not a massive ratio, and then everything's clean. We do have a little pop of like green up here and sort of down here, but it's mostly a clean space. So I feel like either the space is a bright white clean or it should go off to the greener tone, but here it's mixed up between the two of them, and that I think plays a little bit on their skin as well. So why would that be? Well, if you're approaching a scene like this, which is mostly wide shots, there's a lot of wides in here, and we see the windows in most of them, you've got to have good window light coming in, and you've got to be able to work with that natural light in order to make it actually viable for this scene to be shot. Now, competing with that can be very tricky, especially when you're on wider shots in a space like this and you have to cover a lot of people. It feels like they're using the fixtures in the space to fill in the back somewhat, and that has the effect of giving this sort of greenier hue in the room. Now, I don't think that's terrible for a narrative piece. If you were looking at this from a commercial perspective and you were trying to approach it and light it to look really crisp and clean, you would maybe do things a little bit differently. For example, I had to do a shoot a good number of years ago now in a school, basically the same kind of setup, in a school lab, very white, very clean. And what I did was bring in tons, I think I had 4 Kinoflow 4 banks. It was a fairly overcast day, boosted all of the 4 banks up to the ceiling, just gave a nice white, clean level at 5600. And then they were using like little tungsten bulbs in microscopes. So I had a little bit of gel, put it over the tungsten, took the level down a bit and brought it a little bit closer to the daylight, but not completely to daylight. And then I pulled everything in the color grade, so we had really crisp white, everything looked pristine, and then their skin got quite a rich, warm tone from the tungsten as well, and it worked really nicely. In that scenario, the school wouldn't have wanted the lab to have like a greeny, oppressive hue because they want it to look great, they want it to look fantastic, they want it to look the best it can. But if you're in a narrative piece, then the characters perhaps don't want to be in the school, so the school should perhaps have a character which isn't inviting and pristine. So in this scenario, maybe the school doesn't need to have a pristine look because we're not meant to be thinking, my goodness, I would love to go to that school. We're meant to be thinking the characters are a little bit uncomfortable, they're not in their own skin, they're not in their own zone when they're in this environment. So the discrepancy between what you do on a commercial shoot and what you do on a narrative shoot can be quite massive. It's a huge space and they're cutting to lots of different angles. So where I stuck to maybe 2 angles, they're doing 3 or 4 or 5 different shots in this space with lots of extras, and they've got to get dialogue out as well. Puts all kinds of different pressures on different departments, hair, makeup, costume. You've got to work with the light that you've got while you've got it, and they've got to get their lines right, so they've got to have enough time to do that. So coming in and trying to do loads of different lighting setups for each of those different angles would be punishing, especially on TV schedule. If I was trying to do this and get a clean look and I needed to work really quickly, then I would say if I had 3 1.6K HMIs, open faces just blasting up into the ceiling along the back side of the classroom, that could give you a nice flat level of clean white light. If you needed everything to look high key and bright, that would pretty much do it. But at that point you're saying, I want a load of HMIs, we might need a generator depending on the power level that you're asking for that, and what's available in the location. 1.6 in the UK, you might get away with it in this kind of lab setting. They've probably got separate circuits for different things, so I reckon you could probably do that. But if you were having to go hotter with that, say 2.5s, then maybe you run into trouble and maybe they don't want to get a Jenny and they don't want to get all the crew and the grip and all of the paraphernalia that goes to getting that set up. It would be harder, in my opinion, to do it with LEDs. You would need more powerful fixtures or many less powerful fixtures, and rigging them up to the ceiling could get a little bit more challenging. The benefit of using big fixtures and boosting them up into the ceiling is the ceiling becomes the light source at that point, and that's what's emitting the light. So you can just have them on whatever low boys or whatever combo stand you've got there, just flag them off, make sure you don't get any kicks onto the side of the actors' heads. So that's a dead giveaway, so you get a little hard streak coming across from a light that isn't flagged properly. But as long as you're able to manipulate that to keep it clean and keep it off the actors, then it's a nice way of getting a really clean, crisp light across the scene without really having to wriggle that much. The one aspect that will fall down for what they're doing just here, again, I'm just looking at this from a commercial perspective, would be if you're shooting low angles. And a lot of the time we're not really. It doesn't feel comfortable for some of this, and that's what they're going for. But on a commercial, you maybe do want it to feel more comfortable, so you tend less towards these low, wide shots. But we see a lot of ceiling, and as soon as you see the ceiling, you can't fire a light into it because that'll be just blazing white with HMIs up there. So you do need to work with what you're actually trying to frame up for the director, what you're trying to frame up to get the right scene for your actors. Works fine just here, but I do love to look at something and say, okay, well, if this was a commercial shoot, how would I approach it? It's interesting, they keep coming back and having these sort of things happening with blinds. You can see all the way down the line at various points. They've got the blind a little bit the way down, and they've done it in the hallways, they've done it in the houses. They're using some of the practical things just to cut the light a little bit so that it's not coming in so far to the room. So there's conscious decisions, I feel, when they're positioning what's available in their set, what's already set dressing there. And it's cool. It's an interesting way of approaching it, and I think it's actually fairly effective just here. There are things that I might change where we do have discrepancy between the skin tones and the lighting on their faces, but it works well enough that you wouldn't really notice. The only thing I'd say is her skin looks so much clearer in this shot than this shot, and I feel like it's a difference in lighting that is giving us that. And I think you could address it to unify the two. I don't know which one you go for, but I think having a unified skin tone is important. That's the only thing I would perhaps say is a flaw with this, when you have a variance of what the actors actually end up looking like between shots within the same sequence. If you go into a different sequence and it's nighttime, or it's broad daylight, or it's meant to be a lot darker or dingier, then yeah, you can change how their skin looks, but within the same sequence, different angles, I don't feel like it should change or shift at all. Next time we're looking at a scene with some direct sunlight and seeing how they approach working with this in the UK, because in the UK, let me tell you, if you're in America, if you're in California, we do not get as much sunlight as you do, so managing to get it into your scene, managing to create this vibe with it is a challenge.